Bismillah. Methods of heat transfer. I think that we stopped here yesterday in the last class. Heat. What is the meaning of heat? طبعا we often talk about heat as though it is the same as thermal energy, but of course thermal energy is different from heat. What is heat? It is actually energy that transfers
Which
or
page?
moves into an object's thermal energy. Okay, طيب, it is page 348. 348. طيب. What is the meaning of heat, or what is the definition of heat? It is energy that transfers into an object's thermal energy. When energy is added to an object thermal energy, it is called heat. So heat, it is the energy. Simply to understand what is heat, it is energy that moves or transfers from one object to another. The most important thing you have to know that it's always heat moves from a hotter object to a cooler one, not the opposite. From a hotter one to a cooler one. طيب. In any time, heat moves from hotter object to a cooler object. How heat moves, the methods or the ways by which heat moves, it is by conduction, convection, conduction, radiation. All of these ways are described here in this box. We will talk about them. Okay, conduction, convection, and radiation. طيب. In any way, in any method, convection or conduction or radiation, heat moves from a hotter object to a cooler object. طيب. طيب, I will give you example to explain how heat moves. Look at this snow. مش انه الدنيا ممكن يكون في سنو. اللي بتعرفوا سنو مان هذا اللي بيعملوه، مش بيكونوا حاطين على راسه ايش؟ hat. In this example, how heat can move in this example? If from the hat to snowman, or from the snowman to the hat. Are you sleeping?
No.
No,
طيب.
I'm not sleeping.
أنا بعرفش أرسم. This is مثلا snowman. زي هيك. You put a hat here. Okay. طيب. How the heat moves here? From the snowman to the hat, or from hat to the... Which one of them is colder or cool?
The snowman.
Yes. Which is hotter?
The hat.
يعني,
Yeah.
by the way,
It goes from the hat to the snowman.
yes, I don't mean يعني انتوا دائما please it doesn't mean here from a hotter object to cooler object that is very, very hot, and this is must be very hot. No. If two objects, for example, look, if we have two objects with two different temperatures, one is, for example, 30 degrees Celsius and the other is 25. There is no big difference between them, but this is hotter and this is colder. So heat moves in this example from this one to this one. طيب. Now, how heat moves? Heat can move in three ways: conduction, convection, radiation. I want to start with conduction. Conduction happens or occurs between two objects that are in direct contact. They must be in contact with each other. This is the most important thing to know about conduction, that the two objects must be in contact. What does this mean? That for example, in radiation, as we will see, the two objects are not in contact. ماشي? But in conduction, the two objects must be in direct contact. طيب. Now, the transfer, what is the meaning of transfer? Moving. When heat moves, the transfer of heat, the movement of heat between two substances or two objects that are in direct contact, such as between a hot metal prong here, هذا شايفينه, and the hot dog. We have two substances, the hot dog and this metal. Heat moves in this case from where? From the metal to hot dog. And for this reason, the hot dog becomes hot and you eat it. Heat moves in this way by conduction. Notice that the two substances or the two objects are in direct contact. Right. This is called, again, called conduction. Shabab, get it? There, by the way,
Yes, get it.
there are a lot of examples. There are many examples of heat when heat moves by conduction. Another example, I want you to know that also heat can move from within the same object. For example, suppose that it is a metal rod. يعني suppose that, for example, this is a spoon, a knife, whatever, a piece of metal. As you know, metals are conductors. By the way, the word conductors comes from conduction. Okay? As you know, metals are conductors for heat. So heat can move through conductors. Now, suppose that we have a source of fire, a stove here, or a fire. طيب. As you see, heat will move from the fire or stove to this part or this end of the metal. Now, the atoms or particles of the metal transfer heat to the next, each particle or each atom transfer heat to the next one until the whole metal becomes hot. So conduction can happen within the same object from one part or from one end to another. طيب. Most conduction happens or occurs mostly in solids. Why? Because, as you know, in solids, the particles are very close to each other. So it is easier for heat to move through solids by conduction. So again, conduction, it is the transfer of heat or the movement of heat between two objects or two substances that are in direct contact. It can also happen or occurs within the same object. For example, what that is that happens in metals. طيب. And remember that it is always moved from hot object to a cooler object. In this example, in barbecue, whatever, this is a hot dog. It is colder than the metal, and they are in direct contact. As you see, look here, how conduction happens. First, conduction happens between the fire and the metal. Of course, heat moves from the fire to the metal by conduction. Then heat moves from the metal to the hot dog also by conduction. Notice that all of these objects are in direct contact. First, the fire or the campfire, whatever, the fire or the campfire are in direct contact with the metal, and the metal is in direct contact with the hot dog. So by this way, heat moves by conduction. طيب. Now, the closer, of course, the closer together the molecules are in the substance, the better they conduct heat. When the substances or the objects are closer, more closer, conduction happens faster. طيب. This is why conduction works well in some solids, such as metals. As I told you, metals are conductors or are very excellent conductors to heat. In liquids and gases, conduction happens difficult, or it is rarely happens. Do you know why? This is because the particles are farther apart. Please understand this point. Conduction happens well or occurs well in solids because the particles in solids are very close to each other, so it is easier for heat to move from one
ما
particle.
بستعملوش نعبي هيها معي
طيب
لو
شباب،
محلوش
is this point clear?
خذين
Is this point clear?
Yes, it's
يعني conduction happens or occurs much in solids because the particles in solids are very close to each other, as you know. They are very close to each other. But in gases and liquids, the particles are farther apart. For this reason, conduction is weak in gases and liquids. Now, the second type of, or the second way by which convection happens, transfer of heat happens, convection. Convection happens mainly in liquids and gases or fluids. We mean by fluids, liquids and gases. Okay, this word, please remember this word. Fluids mean liquids and gases. Solids are not fluids. Okay, in fluids such as the air or gases or liquids, what happens? How convection happens? I want to explain for you how convection happens. Look, I want, for example, to drink tea. Okay, then I bring water, I put it in the pot, ببريق ماشي. شو بحط هون؟ بيكون stove. طيب, as you know, this is fire. Heat moves from the fire to the pot by conduction. Okay, first, heat moves from the fire or the stove to the pot by conduction. Now, there is water here. As you know, after a short period of time, the whole liquid, the whole water becomes hot. How? طيب. What happens? Now, heat moves from the pot or from the here to water. What happens to the part of water or the particles of water or what that are close to the fire? They gain energy or gain heat. What happens to them? They become hot, and when water or gas or air becomes hot, it becomes less dense. When it becomes less dense, it's a float. It floats above. So the part of water or water molecules that are close to the fire expand. After they gain energy or gain heat, they expand and they move faster and they become less dense. So they go to the top of the liquid. Now, what happens to the cooler water above? Cooler water, as you know, is more dense, so it sinks. This water that sinks also gain heat and become less dense and then rise. And it's like the cycle. The colder water sinks again until the whole liquid becomes hot. The same thing for air. Look, for example, this is Earth's surface. When sunlight heats the surface, the air that are very close to the surface heats and becomes less dense and go up. Colder water sinks, and so on. These are called convection currents. So convection happens in liquids and gases or in fluids, in which in this process always hot water or hot gas becomes less dense and float, cold water or cold air sinks, and the cycle repeats. Get it? طيب, why convection?
Yes.
طيب, a question. Why convection does not happen in solids? ليش ما في convection بالsolids? مين بيقدر يحكي لي؟
Because they can't move easily from one place to another.
Excellent, because particles in solid are just vibrate in place. They can't move. They can't, for example, go and يعني float and sink and so on. So convection happens only in fluids because the particles are free to move. So in fluids such as the hot campfire, the smoke, particles move easily from one place to another, taking energy with them. Convection is the transfer of heat. This is the definition of convection: transfer of heat or the movement of heat by the movement of a fluid. So convection does not happen in solids, only in fluids. I mean by fluids, gases and liquids. Now, the third way, look, يعني خلينا نشوف الصورة هون. As you see, here the smoke or the heat moves from the fire to the air around the campfire by convection. Okay? طيب. The last way by which heat moves is radiation. A most important example for radiation, how energy or how heat or energy comes from the sun, okay, to earth, the electromagnetic radiation. For this reason, it's called electromagnetic. The heat or energy moves from the sun to earth directly. They are not in contact, as you know. Sun is very far from earth, so there is no direct contact between sun and earth. So heat or energy does not move from sun to earth by conduction. They are very far, and also not by convection. So the energy or heat moves directly from the sun to earth by a way called radiation. Okay, the transfer of energy or heat by electromagnetic waves is called radiation or radiation. Okay, the transfer of energy or heat by, inshallah, I will show you a video about these three methods: conduction, convection, and radiation. So the last way by which heat moves or energy moves is radiation, the transfer of energy or heat by electromagnetic waves. طيب. The energy that is transferred from the sun to earth, this is example, is radiation, as you know. All of these waves, the visible light or the colors of rainbow and so on, the infrared, ultraviolet radiation, all of these particles or all of this energy comes from the sun to earth by radiation. طيب. Likewise, also يعني radiation can happen even not from the sun, not only from the sun to earth. The light and heat that are emitted by a campfire to toast a marshmallow or cook a hot dog is radiation. يعني also heat can move from the campfire to the toast.
They can move through radiation.
Yes,
radiation
not only by
waves.
convection. يعني there here in this example, heat can move from the campfire to the marshmallow by convection and also by radiation. All of these, يعني conduction happens in solids mainly, convection in fluids, radiation can, for example, from sun to earth, and also it can happen between two objects, but they are not in direct contact. The most important thing for conduction that the two objects must be in direct contact in conduction. طيب بدي اخر الحصه ارجع اخذ الحضور والغياب، ماشي؟ كمان few minutes. طيب اي ساعه بتخلص الحصه هاي؟
40 على الأغلب أو 45.
تخلص يا أستاذ على 12 و55.
لا لسه في عنا 20 minutes يعني مش مشكله. اوكي. شباب, do you have any comments or any questions about methods of heat transfer?
No, thank
No,
you.
thank you, teacher.
طيب really يعني I repeat إذا مش فاهمين.
لا
أستاذ
فاهم.
تعيد
أيوة.
الكونفكشن والراديشن بس.
طيب ماشي اوكي I don't mind. شهد الحمد لله على السلامة طبعا، وأخيرا حضرت حصة. طيب حجاوي موجود وسواي. اوكي كندا موجودة. طيب كويس. اوكي again let's start from the beginning. Heat is the energy that moves. When energy moves from one object to the other, it's called heat. Or heat is energy transfers into an object's thermal energy. Heat always moves from a hotter object to a cooler one. Heat moves in three ways: convection, conduction, and radiation. The first way by which heat moves is conduction. It is the transfer of heat between two objects or two substances that are in direct contact. They must touch each other. Like example here, the metal and the hot dog, and also the campfire and the metal. Conduction works the best in solids because the particles are very close together, but it's not good or it's weak in liquids and gases. Conduction because the particles are farther apart. طيب. Convection happens in fluids, in gases and liquids. Gases and liquids are called the fluids because the particles can move easily from one place to another. In convection, if part of the, again, in convection, for example, I want to explain about air. When, for example, the air that is close to air surface, as you know, when sun energy heats air surface, the ground becomes hot. So the air that is close to the ground or to the soil heats. So then when the air or the gas heats or gain energy, the particles move very fast and they becomes more farther apart from each other, and so it becomes less dense, so it rises above. Anything that, as you know, with less density floats. Then the colder air or the cooler air above sinks. Then this air gains heat or energy and becomes hot, so it floats again. The colder air sinks, okay, and the cycle repeats. The cycle repeats. By the way, convection is very important in the atmosphere. For this reason, for example, the air move or the movement of wind, because of this reason, okay? Because some part of the air becomes cold, some part of the air becomes warm. For this reason, this is the main reason for the movement of air. Also, convection happens in liquids and gases, in air and water. The last way, the last method by which heat moves is radiation. It is the transfer of energy by electromagnetic waves. Okay, example of radiation when sun or the heat is transferred or from sun to earth. Okay, and here also as you see, the heat or energy moves from the campfire to marshmallow by radiation. طيب. Is there any questions in this page? يعني في هون عندنا question أو reading? No. طيب, let's go to the next page. Now, heat, we are talking about, or we learned about the methods of heat transfer to understand how heat moves at Earth's surface, how heat transfers at air surface. If we understand conduction, convection, and radiation, we can understand how heat moves around at air surface. طيب. First, the sun's radiation is transformed at, what is the meaning of transformed? You have to know that transformed is completely different from transfer. Here, transformed means change from one form.
Transformed from one change to
Yes, change from one
change between
things to another.
things.
طيب. As you know, energy, all forms of energy can transform or change from one form to another. يعني for example, kinetic energy can change to potential energy. Chemical energy can transform to heat or kinetic energy. The same thing, sun's radiation is changed or transformed at Earth's surface into thermal energy. For this reason, the Earth becomes warm. طيب. This is the first thing. So the sun's radiation is transformed at Earth's surface into thermal energy or heat. طيب. As you know, the surface gets warmer than the air above it. Of course, the surface or the ground of Earth surface becomes warmer. Air does not conduct heat well, as you know. So only the first, ايوه زي ما حكيت لكم, the first few centimeters of the troposphere, يعني اللي بيكون very close to the ground, are heated by conduction from air surface. يعني first, look here. How heat, يعني this is this model or this will explain how heat transfer at air surface. طيب, this is the sun. Okay. This is the sun, okay? This is the air surface, okay? Heat moves from the sun to the air surface by what? تعمل اختصار ايش؟ Radiation. طيب. This is the first way. The sun's energy moves or transfers from the sun to earth by radiation. Now what happens to this energy? It is transformed to heat or thermal energy. What will happen to the ground? It becomes hot or warm. Now heat moves from the ground or at the few centimeters of the troposphere. Heat moves from the earth or from the ground to air by conduction. Okay. طيب. What happens to this air that is very close to the ground? It gains heat, then it rises, it floats. Okay? طيب, again. فاهمين شباب ولا لا? Again. The sun's radiation is transformed at the surface into thermal energy. The surface may get warmer than the air above it. Air doesn't conduct heat well, so only the few centimeters of the troposphere are heated by conduction from air surface to the air. طيب. When the ground level air, يعني the air that is very close to the ground, warms up, its molecules move more rapidly, بصيروا أسرع. As they bump into each other, they move farther apart, making the air less dense. لأنهم, because they are moving farther apart from each other, air becomes less dense. The warmer, less dense air, the air that is warmer becomes less dense. The warmer, less dense air rises, as I told you. بيطلع لفوق. And the cooler air that is denser, the cooler, denser air from above sinks toward the surface. Okay? So, as here, this is the ground. The air that is very close to the ground gain energy or heat moves to it by conduction. Then it becomes less dense. It rises here. The colder air sinks. And this colder air again gains energy or heat. Then it rises. And so on. And the process, these are called convection currents, by the way. طيب. The cooler air or the cool air again then gets warmed by the surface, and the cycle repeats or continues, like the cycle, like the water cycle, whatever. If the source of heat is isolated in one place, a convection current can develop. This is very important point to know. If the source of heat is isolated in one place, a convection current develop. This occurs in Earth's atmosphere as a result of radiation, conduction, and convection working together. طيب. Now, every time, or we always say wind, wind, wind. What is the meaning of wind? It is the horizontal movement of the convection current in the atmosphere. Okay, this is the meaning of wind. What is the meaning of horizontal, شباب؟ مين بيعرف؟ ما اخذتوش بالماث شو يعني horizontal؟
أنت العمودي يعني
No,
مش عمودي
هيك
أفقي هيك صح؟
like this, horizontal. اما هيك شو بنسميه؟ vertical. Okay, this is horizontal or this direction, whatever. يعني أفقي. أما هيك vertical هيك. طيب. Okay. So the horizontal movement of the convection current in the atmosphere is called wind. Convection currents are especially powerful in Earth's radiant surface. The convection currents are especially powerful if Earth's radiant surface is much warmer than the air above it. طيب. يعني this information, this is related to why storms can arise much more suddenly and be more severe in warmer regions of Earth. يعني regions of Earth that are warmer, always the storms are very, very strong. طيب. For example, hurricanes tend to form in tropical areas. يعني tropical areas are areas that are close to the equator. Tropical areas are areas that are in the equator. As you know, the globe is divided into this is the globe. معلش أنا بالرسم مش كويس. As you know, this line is called the equator. Tropical areas here. These areas are always warm, okay, because the sun is always direct on these areas. But here, for example, as you know, North Pole and South Pole, it's very cold. At the center of the Earth or in the equator, these areas are called the tropical areas. They are always warmer all over the year. And here the storms or the wind are or hurricanes tend to form in these areas where the sea is very warm and the air above it is relatively cold because of the difference between the temperature. طيب. طيب الآن مين بيقدر يحل لي هذا السؤال؟ Explain how a pot of water, of heated water, could demonstrate convection. Or can you explain how convection, يعني the meaning of the question, can you explain how convection happens in a pot of heated water? على فكرة شرحت لكم إياه. حدا بيقدر explain? The same thing as when air heats. Convection in air or convection in water is the same. طيب. طيب I will explain. راح ابعث لكم الجواب ان شاء الله later بس. First, the heated water or the pot of heated water gains energy or heat transfers to the pot of water by conduction from the stove. Understood? Or from the fire. Then the colder water, the water that is very close to the stove at the bottom gains heat or heat transfers to it. What will happen to the particles? The particles of this water or molecules of water becomes farther apart because they are moving very fast. Then it becomes less dense and this part of water float or go to the top like this. This is a pot of water. The part of water here that heats go or float. Then the colder water sinks. Then the colder water heats again and floats, and the cycle repeats until the whole water in the pot becomes hot. طيب شباب. Do you feel that it is clear?
يس.
Yes.
طيب في ناس على فكرة طلعوا من الميتينج. على كل حال خليني أشوف. أحمد أبو أمر. طيب ما بصير يطلعوا قبل الحصة. طيب على كل حال يعطيكم العافية. see you إن شاء الله tomorrow. شباب
Bye.
إذا حدا عنده كومنت أو سؤال يسألني عادي، يعني مش اليوم بعدين. طيب thank you.
Welcome, Mr.
Thank you very much.